Midterm votes matter.
Hello, and welcome to the 2022 Good Trouble Voting Rights Podcast, sponsored by Black Women for Positive Change, featuring host Dr. Georgia Dunston and co-host Dr. Stephanie Myers. Ladies, take it away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Black Women for Positive Change 2022 Good Trouble Voting Rights Podcast. I am Dr. Georgia M. Dunston, Chair of Black Women for Positive Change Science Committee and co-chair of our Voter Rights Subcommittee. I'm here today as host of the Black Women for Positive Change 2022 Good Trouble Podcast. I am joined by our co-host, Dr. Stephanie Myers, co-founder and national co-chair of Black Women for Positive Change, and our esteemed guests today, Michael H. Peters and Stanley Jackson, two of Black Women for Positive Change CEO Council advisors. We are delighted to bring the expertise and experience of our esteemed guests to speak to us today on this podcast for Good Trouble Voting. I'm going to ask our co-host, Dr. Stephanie Myers, to introduce our speakers.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Dunston. And it is truly a pleasure and a privilege to introduce the two gentlemen that we have with us today, because both of them are outstanding leaders in business and the kind of role models that we want our young people to see. I'll introduce you both and then we'll get right to some questions, okay? Michael Peters is president of Emergent Development Co and president and CEO of Architekton Resources, LLC. He's also the president and CEO of Illuminate Technologies and Trusted Inc. in Washington, D.C. Professor Peters is also a professor at Harvard University, and he has helped build organizations in real estate development, affordable housing, technology, manufacturing, futures market. He has ideas for multiple patents in laser use, anti-fraud, alternative energy, blockchain. And it's just amazing that you can be a professor and do all of these CEO for business responsibilities at the same time. And we're very proud, as Dr. Dunston said, he's co-chair of the CEO Council for Black Women for Positive Change. Our second esteemed guest is Mr. Stan Jackson, president and CEO of the Anocostia Economic Development Corporation. And for 30 years, Mr. Jackson has really put his energy to what his words are, because he has worked in housing and economic development in the Anocostia and southeast section of DC, where the needs are really great. He's been a public leader. He's been director of the District of Columbia Customer Service, Real Property Assessment Services Administration, chief of staff to the District of Columbia Office of the Chief Financial Officer, director of the DC Department of Housing and Community Development, and the list goes on and on. And along with Professor Peters, Mr. Jackson is co-chair of our CEO Council. So thanks to both of you gentlemen for taking time out of your incredible schedules this morning to be with us, because we're really very wired up, stressed out, concerned, and focused on the voting turnout for this election. There's only 2 weeks left before the midterm voting. So we wanted to add the voice of the business community. So the first question that we have is to start with the basics. America's a capitalist country. Would you please share with us, starting with you, Professor Peters, what does that mean? What does that mean in 2022? America's a capitalist country. So what? What does it mean? And then we'll ask Mr. Jackson to respond.
Yeah, I realize that's a question that in the last 20 years or so has become, really since the 70s, has become almost a flashpoint discussion. What is capitalism? What's it good for? And you can argue either case. I think capitalism sort of is built on the game theory called tragedy of the commons. Inside of every person, they really want to advance themselves somewhat more than they want to advance the community. I mean, it's just built into the nature. You take a child that's a 5-year-old, they want to win a game, they want to win a race, they want to eat first, they want to do what they want to do. And so, from age 5, with no training whatsoever, it's built into the genetic makeup of a human to be somewhat competitive. And we've tried the participation awards, we've tried everything we can think of, but in the end, the capitalist system has one inherent good quality and a host of bad qualities. But the good quality is it's an incentivization for advancing one's personal self and their family and protecting themselves. It creates research and development. It creates the most patents in the world. It creates a world where people are crossing our borders by the millions to get here. They wouldn't be doing that and are not doing that to socialist or communist countries. They're doing it here because they have a chance to get ahead, the American dream, and things that are built on the capitalist mentality that are built basically on the DNA of a human if I want to advance myself. Now, the downside of that, of course, is it requires a benevolent heart and this thing called love that looks at the community around and says, hey, I am not going to take advantage of anybody else for my own benefit. I will not forget those that are around me. I won't forget where I came from, and I will leave no one behind. Now, so a benevolent capitalism is the most powerful force on earth from a standpoint of advancing society and creating a standard of living. On the other hand, if we forget, for the sake of shareholders and personal greed and selfishness and fear and other things, if we forget everyone around us, then we've created a destructive force rather than a creative force.
That's quite an answer. Okay. Yes. Stan Jackson, please unmute and give us your perspective.
I agree with my colleague, Michael. I would say that I think capitalism has been narrowly defined on an individual level. I think if you look at capitalism in its purest form, it is a shared value, it's a shared experience. And I go along with what Michael has just said, is that when the value is shared and inclusive, capitalism can be an extremely positive system of opportunity. I think the challenge that we've experienced, that we narrowly defined capitalism to represent individual value and worth. And I think that's a short-sighted view of how capitalism should be viewed and used in terms of uplifting not just individuals, but uplifting communities, uplifting neighborhoods, uplifting cities and municipalities. So I do think there is a thread of value in capitalism that we have sort of gotten away from, and that is the shared value of us, we the people. We've sort of lost that concept as understanding that we the people makes and sustains capitalism. You can't be a capitalist by yourself. There's got to be a giver and a taker. Someone has to win, someone has to lose. And so we have to change that narrative to winners and losers to winners and winners. There's degrees of win that you can look at. So I see the system has been sort of narrowly defined in terms of its pure applications of value if we look at it from the heart standpoint, from the inclusive standpoint, from the standpoint that we want to bring the village along to experience what true capitalism, what true shared progress look like, what's true shared inclusive opportunities look like. I think what we will find when we get to that point of understanding that value proposition, I think that you will look at a system of capitalism. It's not necessarily a bad system, but it's only a system that needs to be continued to be modified and continue to be inclusive so that the impact is shared beyond just the C-suite holders. It's shared among the people who help make the capital real, who help create the value exchange. So that's
well, following up on what you both said, how does this relate to voting? You both have described the purposes, the opportunity, the potential of capitalism. Now we're getting ready to vote. And what relationship does voting, what relationship do elected officials have to creating the positive side of the business that you two have just described? How does voting impact what you've described as the business model? Professor Peters?
Well, sort of tag teaming with my dear brother Stan, I would suggest that the whole idea of a representative democracy is to curtail the abuses of capitalism. So we incentivize through capitalism so everybody can be their best self and be rewarded for being their best self. And we curtail the disadvantages through the voting system. And that is this idea that it's the collective voice of the citizens of a country that decide where the parameters are, where the thresholds are, that guide for the sake of the environment, that guide for the sake of the underserved, that guide for the sake of creating educational opportunities for everyone, which is basically the catapult for the future. It has to be the educational system. So where does a federal government come in, and where does a representative democracy, not a democracy where everybody votes for every policy, but we were designed as a representative democracy, which 80 countries in the world have taken that value system on and said, we'll send people that think like me, that feel what I feel, that experience what I experience, and they can speak on my behalf for the 10,000 things that I don't have time to vote on and I can't possibly educate myself on. So this idea that we all grab a voice together to put people in the place to create the thresholds and the parameters and the boundaries for capitalism is just a beautiful idea. There are 21 countries in the world that have mandatory voting for exactly that reason. Everyone must vote. You don't get a work permit in Brazil unless you vote. So 21 countries said, we so need all the voices that we won't allow ourselves to not have all the voices, because we want everyone from the richest castle to the person that's had the least advantaged life imaginable. They have equal voices in order to put representatives in front of the rest of us to create a world where there are parameters on capitalism.
Okay, well, Stan Jackson, following up on that, you've had 30 years of experience working in a community. What have you observed as you've been a businessman? Does voting matter? Do the people that are elected, do they impact the quality of business from what you observed?
Absolutely. And that is our system. Voting is part of our system. And so what we must do is engage in our system of choice, of system of choosing representation that mirror our echoes the desires of the people you represent. And my sense is that we really don't have an option. We have to engage in the process. That is the process that we use in the governance of our municipalities, of our communities, and our cities, even at the lowest levels of what we call an ANC, which is a neighborhood commissioner, an area neighborhood commissioner. So we have to understand the importance of that. But more importantly, we as the people have to begin to hold these elected people responsible. And part of that says is that we have to be engaged early on with not necessarily voting for people who may have name recognition Our home may be popular because they ran a couple of touchdowns or they scored a couple of baskets. That we have to recognize that we have to bring people to the table of leadership who embodies the spirit, the nature of what is fair and equitable in our communities. We can no longer sit on the sideline and just complain about the outcomes if we don't participate in changing those outcomes. You know, from a business perspective, I say to you, even at this fundamental level, voting is critical because you've got to put people in positions who understand and who shares your values. Perfect examples, we have all kind of barriers that we struggle with. And a lot of time it's from a lack of knowledge. We simply vote on familiarity. Or we vote on popularity. Or we vote on people who have money. You don't have to have a demonstrated body of work. You just have to have name recognition. We've got to get out of that mentality because at the end of the day, your representative who you voted for have to be able to be a messenger, has to be an influencer. You have to influence change that benefits the small business, that benefits the community, and not just benefits yourself. And so I think fundamentally, Mike is right on point that we have to look at the system that we are governed by. And we have to play the game to win the game. And we have to be engaged, we have to be informed, and we have to be involved. And I say that sincerely, that we can no longer sit on the sideline and complain about the outcome. We have to change the outcome. We have to put people in positions that represents your views, your desires, and your mission. If not, we're going to have the same disconnect that we experience today, where we have representatives that espouses concepts and realities that are not reflected or embraced by the people that you represent.
Absolutely. And Dr. Dunston, I want you to feel free to come on and jump in here if you have a question. Professor Peters, you're working with young people all the time. Do you find that they understand all of this? Do they understand the environment that they're working in and the importance of voting to be able to create the opportunities you described?
No, as a general rule, of course, I think we'd all agree they don't understand, but I'm not entirely sure that most adults even understand. As Stan was just saying, it's a popularity contest. It's how you look and how many baskets you made and how much money you have. And in fact, it's easy to prove statistically that the money you pour into a campaign has a very direct outcome in who's elected. What's with that? Why? That's not educating voters. That's tearing people down and the vitriol that Stan mentioned and so on. I mean, in general, I think we need to do a lot better job of just calming down and laying out carefully without any personal attacks, laying out carefully. And I think maybe that's a responsibility, not just of the candidates themselves, but of society as a whole to say, just stop with all that. Here are the features of your candidacy. Here's the platform of your candidacy, and make sure everyone knows the facts rather than all the emotions about it. They know the facts that govern their decision to vote for this versus that. And we're not a fact-based electorate as a whole. In general, the person, whether it's in an urban area, in a high-rise, or in a bad neighborhood, or on a farm in Kansas, in general, if you ask them why they voted the way they did, most people cannot answer. And I think that's in some ways on us. And I love Black Women for Positive Change and their emphasis on this topic, the nonviolence as well as the voting, because it is that process of educating the electorate to say, here's what's at stake. Make sure you vote for what's at stake, not how you feel or the latest insult or injury, but what's really at stake, because that will govern your future and your children's future and your grandchildren's future. We've got to get involved.
Well, Stan Jackson, you've had incredible experience in local government. If you had a magic wand, what would you create to address some of these concerns? People don't know why they vote. They don't know what they're doing. The young people don't know. Having had your experiences and knowledge, what kind of approach should we be advocating for to try to handle this problem?
Well, I think one, we have to get people to understand the fundamental value of voting. We have to first establish that we have a system that is governed by popularity. We have a system that has been, I'm going to say, infiltrated by mass media and sound bites. As you notice now, what you get is sound bites about candidacy or candidates. What they stand for is slogans, but you don't get into the substantive issues. So I think that it's become almost necessary for our churches, our other institutions to understand that you are influencers. How do we begin to change the concept of why these things are important? See, we didn't understand the whole notion of down ballot voting. We didn't understand the relationship of having federal judges and other judges in place as opposed to the Supreme Court judge. I mean, so we have to get back to fundamentals. Somehow we've gotten away from knowledge being sexy, information being sexy, intelligence being sexy. We're into this instant soundbite theory. You know, the more slick the soundbite, the more impactful it is. But there's no substance under the slick. And so what we have to understand is that we have to get back to the basics of what my parents did and what your parents did. And that is you get engaged at the ground level, at the grassroots level, and you have conversations among each other. You have community conversations. I grew up in a community where you at least talk to each other about things, about, you know, school board representative, about who's running for council, and so we don't have that anymore. And so how do we get back to those fundamental things that brought us together as a community of one, to come up with recommendations of identifying individuals who can then carry that message to the electoral process that benefits you, the community. What I see at a business level, there are a number of structural impacts that you have to work through, but oftentimes it gets so detailed when you have to explain to the average citizen all of the nuances of what you have to do to get to providing a service to our community. So I think once again, and I'm going to go with Mike on this, education is fundamental. We may want to devalue the importance of education because a lot of folks are graduating and working outside of their field of interest, are not making as much money as some people who have not graduated. I mean, these are some of the risks, but I think without any question, as we began to look at the evolution of our democracy, as we began to look at the transformation in our industry sectors, this tech industry, the information world, we have to understand that part and parcel to that is to have the fundamental training to be able to circulate and matriculate in that environment. And I think without any question, we the people have to become more engaged, and we have to stop thinking that it's okay just to survive, that it's okay not to progress. We have to understand that poverty is not an acceptable alternative. And we have to work collectively to understand that poverty is a gateway to trauma, is a gateway to abuse, is a gateway to all other kind of issues. And so if we recognize that fundamentally, then we will work collectively to change the mindset, that it's okay to get up every morning just to survive. No, we have to progress, because I know communities that's satisfied with just surviving for day in and day out.
Dr. Dunston, I'm sure you have some comments you'd like to make.
I've been so impressed and by the comments made, and I want to thank again good brother Stan Jackson and good brother Michael Peters. You could not have been more on point, on time, and on purpose, as I like to say. Michael, you began with two words that are near to my heart. You began the first question about capitalists. You said it's essentially in our DNA. You say it's in our best interest. It is, we are all born with self-interest and self-preservation. Capitalism itself, as you said, is a form that brings out what could be the best in people, if indeed how you define self. So that's where my genetics comes in. I think our challenge today is our greatest opportunity for the best of capitalists, but it's fundamental to what the question of genetics and the Genome Project that I focus on brings in. How do we define ourselves? Who are we? Education is great, but what is the mindset of the educator? Education itself is neutral, but we cannot dismiss what do the people who are doing the educating believe about who they are, why they are, and what they are. So I agree with, we can end this podcast with essentially the fundamental information that you both gave in your opening statement. Capitalist is a form of government that has been the envy of the world. But now, this year, 2022, our form of government, constitutional democracy, is on the ballot. Is on the ballot. And we cannot dismiss the question of who we say we are, who we believe we are, in terms of how we reach the very population that you have spoken about. So I want to thank you again. And so I would ask you to kind of close this session with the two of you representing the strength of America, our entrepreneurial spirit, which brings out the inheritance of our self-interest and self-preservation. But now we need to look at how we define ourselves, which is also the focus of the pledge that our group, Black Women for Positive Change, has introduced for voting rights. A pledge that draws from John Lewis's challenge to us to get in good trouble. So we consider these conversations and the things we need to do, get in good trouble. How do we bring people to a consciousness of our true identity, who we are, such that self-interest, can we envision a community where we compete with each other to outlove each other, to outlove each other, to outbear each other? Can we take that very strength of who we are and focus it on competition for the positive things? That's what positive change we want to do. Voting is that opportunity. So could you kind of just comment, each of you, on this very national crisis that we're in being an opportunity for positive change, recognizing that voting is the most nonviolent, powerful change agent for our democracy? If each of you might just get a word.
Professor Peters, go ahead, Mike.
Stan and I were both clapping our hands when you were speaking a moment ago. Couldn't agree more. That's an exciting message, and I think every good thing that's ever happened on this planet. I'm a big believer in this idea of the great man theory of history, right? So it's not just a series of events that determines our future, but it's great people stepping up and motivating the people around them to rise to a higher level. And you just did that for us. You and Dr. Stephanie are amazing in that regard. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you. And Stan?
I can only echo that. I think, Dr. Dunston, you did the close. You wrapped it up, because it is in our DNA to understand that our collective DNA, through the notion of voting, is so fundamental in creating the impacts that we must have to create a much better union, to create a much more inclusive union. And I agree with everything that you said, and certainly the great John Lewis, is that I will never shy away from good trouble. Because sometimes trouble is necessary. It is not all bad.
The waters.
It wakens the senses of what we must do as people who love. And I just want to close with your comment. What I would like to see us is understand the value of how love can change the world.
Amen.
Beautiful. That's
Thank
a wonderful
you so very
point.
much for this opportunity.
Wonderful point to end on. Love can change the world. And that's something we've just got to communicate to the rest of this country, because we've got a real choice here, going to the one side of violence and anger and division and racism and hatred and classism, or the other side of love and humanity and opportunity and helping each other. We've got to make those choices. So thank you so much for your insights and for your knowledge and for your terrific careers. We're honored to have you as a part of our network. And thank you very much for being a part of the John Lewis Good Trouble podcast. Thank you, Dr.
Thanks
Dunston.
for having us.
Thank you.
To our technical producer, Damon Naylor, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Damon.
Dr. Myers, if I might end with
Please.
the pledge, with the John Lewis pledge for this podcast, as I also thank our good brothers for their input. Please, I invite everyone to go to the Black Women for Positive Change website, which is blackwomenforpositivechange.org. Go to the website and pull up the John Lewis Pledge. But it states that what we were saying today, I is personalized, is who I am. I am a citizen of the United States of America with the constitutional right to vote in all local, state, and national elections, and the birthright to pursue life, liberty, happiness, and equal rights under the law. I accept and assume my full responsibility to vote in each and every election, and encourage others to do the same, regardless of race, political affiliation, or creed. I pledge to make voting decisions that benefit my family and community on the state, local, and national level. Like the great Congressman John Lewis, I am committed to getting in good trouble to ensure that our constitutional democracy and voters' rights of the people, for the people, and by the people are protected, upheld, and shall not perish from this promised land.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Good trouble.
Beautiful. Well, we're all soldiers for good trouble.
Right on. That's the perfect note to end on. Thank you so much, everyone.
Midterm votes matter.